our guest today is Lauren Corbut. She is the Vice President for External Affairs at the Oklahoma Center for Nonprofits. And I actually met her through her volunteer work at the Junior League of Tulsa. She was involved in our new partnership that includes Tulsa's Young Professionals, the Junior League of Tulsa, Oklahoma Center for Nonprofits, and Leadership Tulsa. So we are grateful to all of those partners who are helping to bring this board series to you. Before Lauren joined the Oklahoma Center for Nonprofits, she was involved in many aspects of communications and marketing, has higher degrees. She's active volunteer herself. I mentioned Junior League, also involved at the Dream Center and Life Senior Services. And so we're fortunate to have Lauren talking about advocacy, because I think governmental relations is part of what you have done through a great deal of your career. So I'm going to mute myself. I'll be watching the chat thread. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to throw them up, and I will help manage those, Lauren, so you can focus on your presentation. But we thank you for being here today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. What a great organization that I'm honored to talk with. So part of my job at the center is I oversee our policy and advocacy arm. So I actually have a full-time lobbyist who reports to me, and I work with him and some of our advisors, our chief counsel, when we want to impact legislation or help write new laws or things like that. So I am in Oklahoma City quite a bit, working in that space. So I'm going to share my screen and talk to y'all a little bit about what I have learned about turning advocacy into action. So really impacting change and not just kind of giving it lip service. So first, when you talk about nonprofits and advocacy, what you're really talking about is the nonprofit's mission. So the mission is really informing all of the services that you provide, but that includes your work in advocacy. So I kind of think of it as, taking your mission and figuring out how or what public policy, what lobbying activities, education do we need to go out on in order to fulfill that mission. So public policy, which to me kind of sounds like a very heady thing, but it's really just laws, regulations, and funding taken by the government. And because nonprofits are aiming to enact change, as is the government, they're natural partners in this. And you as a person who's involved with a nonprofit, if you serve on their board, if you're in Leadership Tulsa, Leadership Oklahoma, whatever it is, you have a role within this public policy arena. Why? Mainly because you're the expert in whatever your mission is. So you know who you serve, your clients, their challenges and their barriers better than anybody. You also know possible solutions to those issues. It is somewhat a little shocking when you meet with lawmakers here in Oklahoma about how much they don't know about really critical social issues. When you talk to them about homelessness or addiction rates or mental illness, they have no idea about a lot of it because that's not really, their background. Maybe they came from banking, maybe they came from teaching. We have a lot of rural lawmakers where the issues that rural people face are very different than the issues that people in the urban areas face. So they need your expertise. You can't just assume that they know it's a really important issue and they know why and they know all the impacts of it, because 95% of the time they don't know any of that, and they really need you to help them along the way and to educate them. So one of the things that I felt when I started doing this work is I felt really intimidated and uninformed and just really insecure, because I thought that I was going to be walking into these hollowed halls of brain trust and they knew all this stuff and I had to know every factoid and I had to know, have it all on lock because they were going to quiz me. And that's just really not the case. Actually, they're really looking to you, these lawmakers and policymakers, looking to you for your expertise and your experience within the whatever mission your nonprofit is kind of tackling. Wendy, would you say that was your experience as well?
100%. And a lot of them are very curious. They want to hear what their constituents have to say. And some of them ask really good questions, and others you have to lead a little bit to be interested in what you're interested in.
And at the end of the day, policymakers aren't the only ones who want change. Donors do as well. In fact, advocacy-based giving has skyrocketed in the past couple of years. So think about all of the racial injustice. You think about Me Too, Black Lives Matter. So giving to advocacy-based nonprofits has just gone up exponentially. So you think about like anti-smoking, seatbelts, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, marriage equality, even Second Amendment rights, criminal justice, cannabis, civil liberties, all of those are advocacy-based nonprofits, and they all had blueprints for change. It didn't just kind of happen. They went out with a platform and with a plan, and they little bit by little bit made it happen. So really quickly, I want to kind of break down the term advocacy because, again, it seems a little lofty and highfalutin, but really at the end of the day, it's just creating awareness, educating people, saying, hey, this is a problem. This is an issue that people in our community are facing. This is the long-term impact on all of us. And then creating action. This is how we can change it. And if we change X, Y, Z law, it's going to make it easier for us to change it. So I kind of think of it as just educating people who have the ability to make long-term change because they were elected into that position. And it's nothing more than that. There is a difference between advocacy and lobbying. And this is an important distinction because you can get in a lot of trouble, actually. So lobbying is a very specific form of advocacy. And nonprofits, it is legal for nonprofits to lobby as long as 20% of, no more than 20% of their program budget goes to their lobbyists. And this is more about influencing the legislation with direct contact through somebody. So I always think about it is money is the main separation. If you're paying somebody to help influence somebody else, then you're lobbying. If you're trying to influence somebody through just talking to them or educating them or dropping off a pamphlet at their office, that's advocacy. Now, what I do with my lobbyist, we pay him a certain amount of money and he helps smooth the way for meetings and helps me write legislation. But no, I have to make sure that his salary is not more than 20% of my program budget. It's called the H election, and we could get our status pulled for that. So that's something to really make sure that you understand if you were to ever go into this space professionally.
Lauren, is it 20% of the organization's entire budget or just the program piece of their budget?
Sorry, the entire budget.
Okay.
Yeah, the entire budget.
Yeah, and that's actually probably quite a lot of money for a lot of organizations.
Yeah, so if you think about national organizations like the NRA, and granted, they just got into a lot of trouble, so maybe that's a poor example, but, you think about some really big nonprofits, there's a lot of money that they are able to put behind lobbying in order to change policy. And there's also a ton of things you can do that are not considered lobbying, public rallies, any types of training like what we're doing right now, education, if you were to put on a webinar about whatever your mission is, outreach, like any type of direct services that your nonprofit might provide, none of that is considered lobbying. So I have never felt like my hands were tied by this IRS law. It's really just something to kind of that's there, but I don't really ever think about it because it never really becomes an issue for me. So when you think about, like, just to put this in context a little bit, so Leadership Tulsa's mission is to identify, develop, and connect diverse leaders who impact community through service. So what is one radical, earth-shaking change that you could see that corresponds with this mission?
Oh, radical. We don't do anything too radical, but let's see, what's one radical earth check? So I would love to, so what if it was required training for anyone who wanted to run for public office?
Okay. Yeah. So if that's the goal, and we say it would make our mission, you know, that much more substantial and that much easier, and impact our community in a positive light, that's the change that we really want to see. We can then break that down into maybe incremental things. You know, you can't just go from A to Z. So let's figure out how to get, you know, step by step. So first, we want to establish credibility with the right people, and we want to make sure that we don't jeopardize that and that we keep it. So understanding your mission and its benefits and the services you provide really starts with public education. So we want to talk to policymakers about the impact of our mission, and not only just, like, you know, what's on our stationery, right? And so there's a whole process that we can start with, and it all starts with data. And we know how important data is these days, and how much policymakers really rely on it, particularly in a fiscally conservative state like Oklahoma. They will very much want to know how this, if this will, and how this will impact taxes. So that's something to always kind of have in the back of your mind. So, you know, data, these hardcore numbers, people throw them out all the time, but you need to communicate them effectively. And just spewing a bunch of numbers at people, I think they tend to get lost in all of it. I have found that it's really nice to have some type of graph on your handout where you can kind of visually show. And you also have to realize that we are living in a post-truth era. So there are a lot of people who don't believe data. And so you need to be ready. Not that this has actually never happened to me personally, but I have heard stories. You know, be ready to kind of defend it in a way, but just walk people through, not in an aggressive way, but walk people through how you got your data. Be able to cite your sources, be able to say, this comes from this survey that we did, and there were this many participants in it. And the more truthful that you are with the data, and the less editorialization that you do, the better, because people will believe you, and, you know, not have to question what you're telling. The second step is finding a face to go with that data. So this is kind of like the television producer in me, but finding a character that really humanizes whatever your mission is. So people are going to identify with Sarah 1,000 times more than if you were to say, the University of Oklahoma School of Behavioral Health study on, and you're just like, I'm sorry, what did you just say? But if I talk to you about Sarah, who is a teen who was sexually abused by her grandfather and then physically abused by her mother and father, and she started using drugs to escape the pain, you know, and then we put her into therapy, and she's now clean and sober and is going to Harvard on a full ride after this, you know, this behavioral health process, that you identify with that. You know, everybody kind of can think of a Sarah in their life. And at the end of the day, policymakers make laws for the people of their community because they want to get reelected. So if you can show them somebody in their community who this is going to impact, and really put a face and a story with that is compelling and pulls at their heartstrings, 95% of the time you're going to get their attention, other than throwing a bunch of just random numbers and very large words at them.
Is that why so many laws are like named for a prominent victim, or sort of for advocates choose a face for the law and use that name as part of their promotion?
Yeah, absolutely, because people are, that is exactly right, Wendy. People are more, I mean, you understand something like this big. If you talk to me about, mortgage rates, my head is just like, oh no, I'm out. But if you show me a family who's going to lose their home that they saved for 10 years to build because somebody at the Fed is going to change mortgage rates, then that becomes real to me. I can feel their pain and I can see the disappointment on their face. So this is really important. And because you're just a person talking to another person. They might have a staff in a big title, but they're just people who are elected by other people. So the next step is partnerships. And this is really a great way to gain credibility, maybe with people who you don't necessarily already have it with. So they not only will they help you, spread the message, because they have their own audience that they can talk to, which maybe you have not tapped into that. Maybe you're not on their Facebook feed or their Instagram feed as prominent as this other, partner, but also maybe they have a level of credibility with a group that you don't. Maybe you are an urban nonprofit and you need the sway of the rural caucus. Well, in Oklahoma, it's not really between Democrat versus Republican, because there's so few Democrats in our state. It's really urban versus rural. So you really need that rural caucus, and you can go out and you can find a nonprofit or an association or some group of people that will give you credibility and buy-in from them, because they're from the rural caucus as well. So they don't always create like exact alignment. Sometimes it's not, we believe everything hook, line, and sinker that you're selling, but they do help strengthen your credibility. They help spread your message. And a lot of the times, they're cost effective, because if I'm going to partner with Leadership Tulsa to spread my message, a lot of times Wendy would do that for free. We're friends, we have a great professional relationship. And so she's going to help me out for free. And believe me, when you work for a nonprofit, money always matters. The cost always matters. So the next kind of line in this is your outcome and impact. So why are your outcomes important? Like, this is something that really within the first couple sentences, when you meet with lawmakers, you need to tell them why it matters. Sometimes it's money, and that always gets their attention, again, because we live in a really conservative state. But you have to go beyond, like, we serve 1,000 people with, who suffer from food insecurity, and we give them meals. But go beyond that and say, we got X number of people off of food stamps, which ended up saving the state government X amount of dollars. That's going to get their attention. What happens because of your services, not what you do and who you serve. They hear that all day, every day. And then, systems do change. Actually, it was a nonprofit that changed, that got seatbelt laws into effect. I mean, before 1974, Wendy, you can speak to this, that, it was your mom's like arm, right? It was like, this is the mom sign. I still do it with my purse.
Bouncing around in the back of the station wagon was
yes.
what we did on the way home.
Wood-sided paneling. Yes.
Totally that. I love that you mentioned that, like Mothers Against Drunk Driving and some of those other organizations, because we so often think of community organizing as a new thing, but it's not a new thing. It's been going on a long time.
Right. Yeah. So I'd be interested, Wendy, what are some of your stories, testimonials that you would want to communicate if you were trying to get Leadership Tulsa as required training?
Yeah, so I think what I would probably do is go specifically to some of the people that have successfully served in public office, who were graduates of our program, and get their story about how it helped them be more effective at that. We have several mayors in Tulsa that are past Leadership Tulsa members, and I remember Bill LaFortune used to talk about how one of the first things he did, when maybe it was just my group that said this too, when he decided to run for mayor, was he reached out to some of his Leadership Tulsa classmates to get their help. So have them talk either about how it informed them on issues and made them better representatives, or how it helped them actually achieve their goal of getting elected, would probably be the stories I would talk about.
Yeah, and you could even reach out to partner, like, Leadership Oklahoma City or Leadership Oklahoma.
Absolutely.
Those would be natural partners for you to spread kind of the word about, what the policy that you were wanting to change. And so, how these changes in public policy could really amplify or speed up your mission of impacting people. Obviously, it would just be helping you with visibility, getting more people to know your program and to participate in it. So it's always really important to play defense. So they always say a great offense is your best defense. But the first part of that is really understanding what I call the game, right? So understanding the legislative process, understanding the deadline. So session is always the first Monday in February, and sine die is the last Friday in May. But also there are a ton of deadlines along the way. For example, if you want a bill to be heard this upcoming session, it is due by December 10th. So it's important to know these, because you can't go to a lawmaker and say, hey, I want to affect this public policy, or I want to change this law. And they say, well, that was actually due a month ago, and you can't go to whatever lawmaker and say, hey, I want you to author this bill on the 9th of December, because they're going to say, I don't have any time to look over this. Like, who do you have from the other, the other chamber? Well, what if I don't like that person? So understand the game you're playing before you try to play the game, because it goes to that credibility part. And it can be really confusing a little bit, like who's on first. This is a really easy, kind of chart that I put together that, kind of shows the flow of things. But it's also really important to understand that a lot of this stuff happens behind closed doors. A lot of this happens, at Broadway 10, which is a kind of the main watering hole for lawmakers in Oklahoma City, which is at Broadway and 10th. A lot of it happens over lunches and things like that, and it doesn't really happen out in the open. So this is where, the official things happen, but the conversations that really impact things happen kind of off of the floors and out of the chambers. So it's really important that you understand that. And it's really, really important that you focus on relationship building.
Lauren, can I say one other thing about working with legislators?
Absolutely.
So that really intense period during February, March, April, I think goes into May. If you want legislators to attend things, it's really hard to get them during that time. So a lot of your relationship building with them has to be outside of that period of time.
And I think it's also worth noting that, they will be in Oklahoma City during, those 4 months, but a lot of times they go home on the weekends or they go home on Thursdays. So if you're trying to, build a coalition in the off period, you're either meeting via Zoom, or you're talking on the phone, or you're driving everywhere to meet in person, because they're not going to be in Oklahoma City at off times. And when they are there, generally, big groups are having parties and they're having happy hours. And so getting on their calendar is really, really difficult, like Wendy said. So relationship building we talk about that social capital, and are the good old boys club, but it really is so important. And if you have any takeaway from me for all tonight, the one thing I would want you to take away is be nice to the assistants, because they hold the keys to your kingdom. And if you disrespect them or are rude to them, they will make your life very difficult, or they can make your life really easy. And they're generally lovely people, but for some reason, I have some friends who work as aides. People really disrespect them, and they have, generally how it works is they have access to the lawmakers' emails and their schedule, and they can easily shuffle things around for you, and help you out. And of course, are talking to their bosses about people who are coming and going and what's going on. So they can really impact your road. So be nice to them. But other than that, it's all about understanding who holds the power, who has, access to certain committees, who is the ranking member of certain committees, and all of that can be found online. So it's, before you go in, know who you're talking to, know where they're from, understand that, they're from Tulsa and they represent this district, and this is the big issue in this district, and this is how my mission impacts them. A lot of the times, I think Wendy sent out one that I sent to y'all earlier this year about nonprofits in Tulsa County. So we have the nonprofit kind of statistics for all 77 counties. So if I'm going to go in and I'm going to talk to a certain legislator, I will print off those statistics for Garvin County or whatever county they represent. And I'll also know a couple of nonprofits who are members of the center from that county, and be able to talk about their missions and the impact they have on, the place that this person represents. Because at the end of the day, they're going to have to run for re-election in Garvin County. And if I can say, you helped these people, they're going to look kindly on that, and they're probably going to vote for him or her again. So, the next thing is, a big thing with defense is to understand the threats and identify them early, and continually be checking back. Things happen really quickly, particularly during session. Something can be up for vote when you didn't think it was going to be up for vote, or something could go into committee and you didn't realize it was in committee, and then come out completely different and have to go back to the other chamber. So you really need to have somebody either at the Capitol during session, or somebody who just really can get information quickly, because things change really quickly and they will impact you. So understand what could be certain threats to your mission, whatever that may be, or to whatever bill you're advocating for, and know, how far you're going to let it go before you want to step in and say something. Like, for example, so this is an unintended consequence. There is a wonderful nonprofit in Oklahoma City. We just honored them last week at our Visions Award, called Chronicle. And they publish a magazine, and homeless people, or people who have unstable housing, they sell it. And it is a way for them to, get work and have an income, and change their situation for the better. Well, there was a piece of legislation that came up at the Oklahoma City City Hall about panhandling in the median, because people were really upset about it. They thought it was a nuisance and it was dangerous. And this was an unintended consequence for Chronicle, because they couldn't sell their magazines and their papers anymore, because that is exactly where their workers would stand. So you have to kind of think outside the box with the unintended consequence. That obviously was never the intended consequence of this legislation. It was really just about safety for panhandlers and safety for drivers, but it ended up impacting something that is a really wonderful organization. So think outside the box. I think that that's also really important because a lot of times, I think a lot of times things domino and we don't realize it. So the top 3 real threats, what do you think those would be, Wendy, that would negatively impact the population that you serve?
That's a hard one for me because we're not a social service.
Right.
Well, so I guess if the legislature's changed any tax policy that could negatively, like all of a sudden we were taxed on something that we weren't taxed on before, that could negatively impact our people. That's an interesting question, Lauren. I don't see a lot of threats from like public bodies.
Right. So one thing that, it's interesting a lot of the times, going back to the education part of this, a lot of times, lawmakers will write a law, something happens and they're all fired up about it and they go and write a law and they don't even realize the unintended consequences. For example, last session, there was a bill that came up that this lawmaker, he found out that, he gave money to a veterans group and he is really pro-veteran. And he found out that a lot of the money that's collected here in Oklahoma is actually going outside of Oklahoma to be used. And he was incensed about it because he thought, I'm giving money to Oklahoma veterans. Why are Arkansas veterans benefiting from it? So he put up a piece of legislation. He wrote a law that said every nonprofit in Oklahoma on every single piece of printed material has to disclose how much of their collections stay within the state of Oklahoma. Well, he didn't realize that the amount of money that would cost nonprofits here in Oklahoma it would really hurt. Like if I came to Wendy and I said, hey, you have to reprint all of your collateral, she would, and get it redesigned, that would really hurt you. That would really hurt a lot of organizations.
Yeah.
So that's an unintended consequence that, really happened last year, that a lot of times lawmakers, they really have the best intentions. They just don't think beyond their scope because they're not an expert in whatever the mission is, whatever their field is. And so they think they're doing all this good and really we're like, no, you're going to hurt us, like terribly hurt us. So those are kind of some of the unintended consequences that could really hurt just all of the nonprofits. So creating a platform, it's really as easy as getting your mission, whatever change you want to see, and then addressing the possible barriers or threats. And that's the basis for your platform. So, there are some issues that you could go out and just educate the public on, like, hey, there are people running for office within Tulsa who don't really even know much about Tulsa and its history and its, unique cultural makeup and racial diversity. So we really think that putting them through Leadership Tulsa ahead of them running for office would be best for everybody. And then also, you can engage in advocacy discussions about policy changes. So that's when Wendy or her, coworkers could go to City Hall and say, this is what I'm advocating for. This is why. And she could even, for a cost, obviously, talk about direct lobbying. And a lot of that is just what lobbyists really help with, at least in my experience, is really just access. So, opening doors, knowing who to talk to, and they're at the Capitol all the time or at City Hall or wherever they are. So they know the players know them, they already have a relationship with them. And you already are a little bit more credible with the lawmaker if you're introduced through somebody who they have a relationship with. So it seems very, I think at the onset, when you talk about advocacy and public policy, it can seem, like this Everest of an idea, of an issue. But at the end of the day, it's really just you educating people about the mission of your nonprofit or your organization. And with social media, I mean, we look at what happened, in the Middle East, all of those, those waves of social change happened, through Facebook. We see Black Lives Matter or hashtag Me Too. That conversation started with one tweet. So it's really easier than ever to impact social change and to start kind of the wave of knowledge and just a conversation. But having some real concrete facts, testimonials, the face of your organization, and a plan going forward is always best and is most impactful. So I want to open it up for questions. I don't really have much else.
Let me unmute myself. So I actually had a question. So nonprofits who want to do advocacy are limited to that 20% of their budget. But we do have nonprofits that we were talking about, which are set up especially for community organizing.
Yeah.
Do they have a different set of rules, or do they also have to keep that 20% for direct lobbying? So like here in Tulsa, I'm thinking about a Terrace Crutcher Foundation or something along those lines.
So I'm only talking about 501c3s.
Okay.
So that's all I'm talking about.
Different 501.
Yeah, I think it's 501c4s are advocacy based organizations. If I remember correctly, there's so many, but I'm pretty sure it's 501c4s, but I'm talking about 501c3s where all of your contributions are tax deductible. So
that makes sense then.
Yeah, it's all about the money. Yeah, it's all about the money at the end of the day.
So if anyone else has any questions, feel free to put them in the chat thread while I'm waiting for you to do that, or unmute yourself since we're a small group. But I also, so you have a full-time lobbyist for the Center for Nonprofits, and I know for a fact that Marnie was talking about the efforts that you all made to make sure like the payroll protection program helped nonprofits. What are some of the other issues that you all are following at the state legislature that you've got your lobbyists paying attention to for you?
Right. So two of the big issues that we're following right now is ARPA. So it's the American Rescue Plan Act. So the state of Oklahoma, so like the state government that Kevin Stitt heads, is getting $1.8 billion. Now the cities and the counties are getting an additional allocation from this federal relief act. So we are currently lobbying the state to allocate a certain amount of money to nonprofits that have been hurt. So that I spent a lot of time, I spent the majority of my day talking about that. And it is a beast of a lift. But we really feel like nonprofits were really burdened because not only did, contributions go down, but the need for services went up. So there were more people needing food bank assistance, mental health assistance, while their fundraising numbers went down. And I think it was 88% of nonprofits that we surveyed said that they had to cancel a fundraiser during COVID because of social distancing and things of that nature, and just the world shut down. The other big one is something called the Open Meetings Act. So it is an attempt for transparency here in Oklahoma, and we feel like nonprofits are unfairly burdened. So if you receive funding from the state, you have to, and you have to post your board meetings a week in advance, and people have to be able to join them. And if they're virtual, like if this was a board meeting, I would have to post my home address with the meeting notice. So if say Deborah is a journalist and she wanted to come to my home and see what I was doing during the meeting, she could do that. So we really feel like, if the Arts Council gets $500 from the state, they're really unduly burdened with this like very bureaucratic law that kind of loops them in in an odd way. So we're trying to get nonprofits written out of it because we feel like they should have never been included in the first place.
Yeah, a lot of nonprofits get their money through contracts instead of direct allocation, and I wonder if that could be a loophole.
Right. Well, but how the law is written right now, if you get any grant from the state, you have to abide by this Open Meetings Act. And I am a former journalist. I, believe in the First Amendment, and I believe in transparency. And so so city councilors can't just, call in and turn off their camera and vote for legislation that is really controversial, so without ever answering to the people who elect them. That's what it was really intended for, but unintended consequence, we were talking about nonprofits got looped into it.
Good. Well, Deborah unmuted, so I think she may have a question, and then we have one in the chat thread after Deborah.
I actually do have a question, Lauren. This has been great information. I appreciate you coming out or coming online and sharing all this information. I had a question regarding building the relationships and with policymakers. I had I don't even know if it's lobbying, but I had tried on behalf of our HOA to make a change within the city of Broken Arrow. They had told me, one of the ward members had told me that they all make their decisions prior to any meetings. So I would need to contact and present a packet of information and contact separately each separate board member. I mean, do you find that the case with most policy changes, that they've already made up their mind, and do you need to contact each and every one of them, or is it just a matter of contact? I mean, this was only a board of 6 person. So do you need to contact everybody? Do you need to contact certain ones, or what is your experience on that?
Yeah. So like I said, everything that really happens during session, a lot of the times those, floor speeches, a lot of it's really theatrics because they have already made up their mind. They know what they're going to vote on a certain piece of legislation long before the vote is called. And it really, and this is, I want to answer your question, but so as far as impacting everybody, it really depends on the makeup. So if it's a 6-person panel and you need a majority, then you need to go and, influence 5 of them. Or 4 of them, excuse me. But if it's if you're talking about like in the Capitol, like in Oklahoma City Capitol, you just really need to impact the key decision makers because, like, for example, people have said, oh, well, I have such and such Democrat. And at the end of the day, like, it doesn't really matter because Democrats hold 0 power in Oklahoma City. Like, nobody cares what the Democrats are doing. I'm not trying to, I have some Democratic mentors who are lawmakers, and one brilliant woman, and she's just the best, like, most lovely person, but she doesn't hold a lot of social capital, even though she's one of the longest tenured, because she's a Democrat. But if I'm talking about, some key Republicans, like the Speaker of the House or the pro tem, those are key people to sway. And if you can sway them, they'll get everybody else in line for you. So it's understanding kind of how the decisions are made within that certain body. So I would probably say, like, for, your HOA, you probably need to sway 4 people and make sure that they're going to vote with you ahead of time. And if you have 2 dissenters, it's like, well, I don't really care because I already have a majority. But if it's in Oklahoma City, it's, and it's a tax policy, then I would say Senator Thompson, Representative Wallace, who are over financial decisions, and they're Republicans and they wield a lot of power. You need them on lock before you get anybody else, because then I can go to somebody else and say, oh, well, I already have Senator Thompson. He's going to vote for this. Oh, really? Yep. I talked to him this morning. He rubber stamped it. Oh, that's so great. Then I'll do it.
How do you understand who those key players are? What's the best, if you're starting out and you're new?
Yeah. So if you're starting out, it's, if you go to like oklahomahouse.gov or oksenate.gov. All of their committee assignments are listed. Their rank is listed. Like you can go to like Senate leadership and then click on it and you'll see who all the leaders are. And then you can go to each committee and see who is the ranking member on each committee. And then, like I just said, know that it's not between Republican and Democrat, it's between urban and rural here in Oklahoma, which I thought was really interesting. I covered politics for years in DC at the national level. And so on the East Coast, you're always talking about, conservatives and liberals, but here it's urban rural, which I thought was just, I don't know, just a nuance, but honestly, it's just being around it a lot and just kind of understanding and meeting people and, just having lunch with people and, they can, and you just kind of start to pick it up, I don't think that there's any exact process exactly. It's just more just being around it and immersing yourself in it. And there are a lot of organizations like, the Oklahoma Policy Institute or the Institute for State Goals that you can get involved in if you really are passionate about influencing public policy. Like the Oklahoma Academy for State Goals, they have these huge, every year they pick a different topic. Like this year was mental health, and we all went to the River Spirit and we talked about mental health for days. And then we they compiled everything we talked about and the public policy that we want to see change here in Oklahoma that will positively impact mental health. And that is what they're going to go out and lobby for this year. So if you're really passionate about influencing public policy here in Oklahoma, there are a myriad of organizations that you can become a part of. And I'm happy to talk to you about that anytime because I'm part of those organizations and you meet really, really cool people who are really interesting.
And Lauren, you mentioned mentors too. I imagine having mentors is helpful.
Yes, absolutely.
So from the chat thread, Algonquin says, my question is related to a thread on defense. How fast can an issue unravel? How much time goes into staying on top of the policy to prevent potential threats?
Oh gosh, they can unravel literally in the blink of an eye. I mean, it's really like you think that you have somebody like this is your linchpin. I have this influential person behind it, and they had a lunch with somebody, and that lunch it completely unraveled because they were told something during that lunch, and now you don't have that person who is your linchpin, and that means that 10 other people are now not behind you. So the majority of my day is spent just constantly checking email, checking in for, updates with my lobbyists during session, not during session. I'm constantly reading, seeing what people are, looking at. I'm talking to people about what do you think the big things are going to be this session? What are you hearing, in your circles? And then also concurrently working to make sure that the things that I want to happen during session, that the people are primed and ready and they have the information they need to make those critical decisions, hopefully in my favor.
And I can really see that that's a big advantage of working with a professional lobbyist because they know how to have their ear to the ground and do that work for you.
Yeah. And because Oklahoma is kind of a big, small town in a way, there's always a backstory. So, I'm really blessed that not only do I have a lobbyist, but also my boss's husband is one of the best lobbyists in the entire state and has been lobbying in Oklahoma for more than 40 years. So he can give me context like, hey, just know that this person and this person used to work together and then they had a split and then this happened. And, he knows so much, he has so much institutional knowledge about how things work and, just context about relationships and coalitions and how things started that has been really beneficial. So finding somebody who can, kind of explain that the nuances of that is really invaluable.
Lauren, this has been terrific. I have learned a lot, as I'm sure our group is, and we did record it. I just put in the chat thread the link to the type form survey that is your participation link if this is required training for your placement on a board internship. I'm just going to share it quickly. It's a real simple survey to take if you haven't taken it before, but be sure to hit submit survey at the end so that we get the results in. And with that, I think I'll wrap it up. This is not only the wrap up of tonight's training, but our 2021 series. And Lauren, it's just so good to reconnect with you on Zoom.
It's so nice to see you.
I hope our paths cross soon in the new year.
Yeah, absolutely. And if anybody has any questions or want to grab lunch or anything, Jonathan Gobo, I see you. Just feel free to reach out to Wendy. She has my contact information. You're welcome to give it out.
I'd be happy to connect you. So everyone have a great week and get a lot done this week as we get ready for some time off.
Thank you, everyone.